What's going on, everybody? It's your boy JT, and we are back to the Crypto Den. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Today, we are going to continue on our explanation of real world use cases for blockchain. This is a very, very passionate topic of mine. This is the cornerstone of my research and what we do over at Bleeding Edge Capital. For those who do not know, I am Jake Tullis. I also go by JT, and I run a digital asset hedge fund called Bleeding Edge Capital, which really is just a discretionarily long index of blockchain technology. I identify really exciting protocols prior to adoption with a specific buy box, and we are research driven and we are long. So, this channel is where I go through all the principles and fundamentals of blockchain to help you best understand what this stuff is. That's why I'm here. That's why you're here. And I think one of the most important things to understand is what is blockchain? What are the future potential disruptors? And, you know, there's a lot of history we can review and use to come to intelligent conclusions about how this technology could uproot certain industries and where and how. So, with that, I'm going to get over to my screen where I have drawn what I'm going to call the evolution of the internet. Okay. You've probably seen this one before if you were on my last video talking about RWA, but this is something really important to understand. So, this is like circa, let me think, 1960s. Oh my God. 60s to, I want to say, you know, 1987. I might be a little off, but you know, you get the idea. Okay. And then from here, this is 2009. This is when that's when Bitcoin came out. And then this is basically, all right, this is the history of the internet. Now, when it first started out, it was just a government project, and the computers were as big as a two-story home. All it really was used was for digitizing information. So all the computer could do is read whatever file you gave it, and it would then turn it into ones and zeros or binary code. And then you could send that digitized information to another computer through wires that line the entire ocean floor to a different country. And governments had been building this network of massive computers and improving upon it over time with the likes of, IBM and Oracle and Microsoft in the 70s and all this other stuff, right? So they're building this network. And once the network had been built to a point where they assumed it could support all of the users, they basically opened it up to the world, called it World Wide Web, and made it a public good. There are unique splits there, like China has their own internet and it's just their own closed network inside of their country and all this other stuff. But in general, that is the internet we use today. It is the government's public good that they maintain. When DARPANET turned into the internet, we got a new function. We went from being able to read, which was established between the governments, to now we can write. That brought in this concept of decentralizing that digitized information. So if I could write a paper, give it to a computer, it turns it into a file. That's called digitization. And then that file can be used really on the internet to do anything. You can put it on a website, you can email it. You basically are able to write that information to the internet and then have it decentralized and distributed to the entire world. That started something in the 80s that has it was a Pandora's box. If we go back and think about the growth of the internet from the 80s to present day, there's probably been $10 trillion that has been taken out of MSNBC, CNN, all of the large third parties, the intermediaries that had a centralized way of distributing information. Hey everybody, it's JT. Just in case you didn't know, I would love a sub. Almost 97% of you that have viewed our content have not subscribed, and it would mean the world to me if you just hit that sub button, give us a like, and let us know how we're doing. All right, back to the content. Anyone that was distributing information in the 80s and they were an intermediary where, you know, like think about in the 50s, if you wanted to get a marketing material out, you had to go to a newspaper, you had to go to someone that had rails for information, you had to go to the news networks, you had to go to Western Union for telegrams or whatever, right? Like all, I mean, phones existed back then, but you get the idea. There's a third party that sits between information, right? And when social media came about, it allowed us to decentralize the information peer to peer. So think about the difference between Joe Rogan podcast and CNN, right? That is the difference that the internet provided, decentralizing information and allowing for peer to peer transactions of that information. Even what I'm doing right now is a peer to peer transaction. I am writing this video file to the internet so you can read it when you click play. It's the same idea, okay? And YouTube is a platform that facilitates this transaction. And really, it's because for this transaction to happen, they had to invest in a bunch of hardware and all this other stuff. And that's why it's so centralized. This is currently on a YouTube server, a Google server, right? And then you're calling that server every time you want to watch play, okay? Or you click play. And now we have blockchain, okay? So this is when Bitcoin came out. It's the exact same process as information, but now it's value. Okay. Value, 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 value. Instead of digitizing, we can tokenize. Tokenizing is the process of essentially establishing equity in something digital of any kind. Ownership is what it's establishing. It can do that by creating a trustless environment where we don't need a third party to transact value. We just don't. So if you go back and look at the internet and its proliferation in the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and so on, you can start to understand that wherever there was an intermediary between information, it was disrupted. That will be the case with blockchain, where there's an intermediary between value, because it's always going to be more expensive. It's always going to be an unfair game when it's centralized like that. So instead of Google going out and buying, a building, a data center where all of our videos get stored and all this other stuff, there's networks like Render. Render basically takes people, peers, someone like me, buying a computer, plugging it into the wall, renting my GPU and my compute and my storage, basically giving my computer to the network. I get paid in the render token every time someone uses it. The encryption protects my computer and protects them for anything I might do to the money they're spending, right? And on the other side, that individual buys the render token. So instead of giving the money to YouTube, they can much cheaper buy the render token and then give all that value generated by the network to the users that actually propped up that network. That's how you can get rid of that intermediary. Render is a protocol. It's an internet protocol, no different than how domain names work, right? A lot of people know that GoDaddy, that's an app. Okay, that's the intermediary for the domain name service. They took DNS along with Wix and WordPress and all these other people, and they built an app using that protocol to make it easy for you to make a website. Okay, that same process is going to happen with value. I currently don't need an intermediary to go get a loan on my tokens. I don't need to go to a bank. I don't need to go to anybody. I can go do that on a myriad of different protocols like Curve, DAO. I could do it on Maker, DAO, Morpho, Aave. There's a lot. Okay. And that's only going to continue. As blockchain becomes more and more adopted, as it gets used more, we're going to find that using these peer-to-peer networks are cheaper, faster, and safer and better than trusting the banks that God knows what they do with our money. I mean, they take $1 and they loan out 10 as an example. So that's 900% inflation on the dollars you actually give them. They give you 20 bips, right? 0.2% when they're making 8 or 9. All of that margin can be distributed to the participants of a network with blockchain. So if you ask me what are the real world use cases for blockchain, it is wherever you have an intermediary between value. The internet is getting a third function, ownership. We can now own things digitally. You think you own something, but you don't because it's being stored on a large company's server. It doesn't matter if it's iCloud, YouTube, Google Drive, doesn't matter. It's not yours. If your Google account gets locked out or you forget your information, everything that you cared about that you stored on Google is gone. And that's just not how it works in blockchain. It's all yours. It's all in your wallet at all times, and you only pay for what you use, so it's incredibly cheap. And it's only going to get cheaper. A lot of people failed to think about that 5, 10 years from now. So I would start looking at things, industries, places where value will be disrupted, where that intermediary, like banks and title companies, title searches, really wherever there's value being exchanged and transactions, blockchain can replace those third parties. And that is where blockchain has real use case. Okay. That's it, y'all. Hopefully, this was helpful. Reach out with questions. I appreciate you all for tuning in. And until next time, take care of one another. Peace.